So, tell the surprise, who edited The Wizard of Oz?
Blanche Sewell.
And who is Blanche Sewell?
Blanche Sewell was one of the many editors who worked in the studio system in Hollywood in the 30s and 40s and on before and after. And she did many other films, but when I started to research this, I came across her, and it was one of those moments where I thought, I have never wondered who edited The Wizard of Oz. I've seen it, we've all seen it. I've been a filmmaker forever, but never occurred to me that somebody might have edited and that it would be a woman. Yeah. So that blew my mind, and that became kind of my mantra. The whole year or more that I was working on this, I kept thinking, who edited The Wizard of Oz? Because it also became a question that led to all the other questions you could ask about who edited every film you love, every film.
So it's not just the who did it, being women as opposed to men, but that it happened at all, that somebody is actually editing. Let's get to that, but let's back up with how women found themselves behind that editing room door and who they were.
Well, in the early days, people didn't edit. You know, they were just single reel films. And then people started understanding what editing was, and it was a menial job. You know, you had a short bit of film and you would sit in a room with a rewind and kind of hold it up to the light and cut things together. And so back then they thought, oh, women are really good with their hands, they're good at sewing, and so we'll make them do that. And we'll not let them continue to be cinematographers and directors, which women were in the early days. And so they became stuck in this back room, and they were called the cutters because they cut. And gradually, film became more complicated, editing became more complicated, and it was the women who were doing it. And at the point that sound came in, so 1929, and we're talking about sort of the Hollywood system then, but cinema was going on all over the world. But anyway, at that point, they thought, oh, you know, sound is kind of complicated. Maybe these ladies won't be able to do it. But all of the major studios in Hollywood, when they had their first sound film, they were all edited by women, because women actually did figure out how to cut sound and picture together.
Fancy that.
So, and there was a point at which Irving Thalberg, who was the head of one of the big studios, sort of invented the term editor, and because of Viola Lawrence. So even the term that we now know was used for the first time because of what this woman was doing.
And Viola Lawrence was?
She was a major editor in Hollywood. She cut The Lady from Shanghai by Orson Welles. And there was a lot of sort of back and forth between the editors and the producers and directors. And so Viola Lawrence is known for the fact that when she was trying to cut Lady from Shanghai, she couldn't do it well enough because Welles hadn't shot enough close-ups. So she went to the producer and said, you need to tell him he has to, and you know, these directors are like, oh, don't tell me what to do. But he actually had to do it, so she could cut in these close-ups. And there are a lot of examples of that.
But then we think of it as the film by Orson Welles.
Right.
Which is a whole nother subject.
It's a whole nother
subject. But we'll get to it.
Okay.
You've sort of moved quickly over, I've been a filmmaker for many years. You have been a filmmaker for many years. Talk us a little bit about how you got into this work, what you thought your journey was going to be, and then, I don't know, how it feels, what you think about coming upon this kind of large body of undone work
right.
in the 21st century.
Well, I mean, I started making films in 1978, and I immediately did the editing as well as the shooting and writing and whatever, because to me that was a very exciting aspect to putting it together. You know, I couldn't imagine trying to explain to somebody else how to edit.
Budget had nothing to do with it?
I would say not at the beginning, and after a while, to me, editing was so essential or central to the project that I wouldn't have thought to hire an editor. The website is divided into two parts, so you have...
This is the website you've created that I referred to.
Yes, the website. And so there are about 98 professional editors who are each on a page featured singly. And then there's a section in the back called Filmmakers Who Always or Sometimes Edit, because as I was working on it, I thought, hold on a minute, you know, there's Bobby McLean or Renu Saluja or you name it, you know, all these incredible editors, but there's also a lot of people like me who do their own editing. So, so for me, at the point at which I started working on it, I was teaching, I teach film production, I was looking at a chapter of a book about editing to give to my students. And I'm, reading it along. They're saying, oh, this fantastic thing that somebody developed, blah, blah, blah. And it only said the director. It said in North by Northwest by Hitchcock, da, 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 da. And I thought, well, why aren't they mentioning the editor? So I went through the entire chapter and looked up all the films to see who the editor was. And when I did, at least half of the films mentioned were edited by women. And this is a chapter about good editing, right? So suddenly, there's The Wizard of Oz, Blanche Sewell. And I thought, how do I not know about this? And that was it. It was like from that day, I thought, everybody needs to know what happened when these films were made.
Because you yourself are renowned, as I say, as, well, a feminist, avant-garde, LGBTQ, adventurous filmmaker, creating an oeuvre that hadn't existed before, both form and content, subject matter and form. And yet you've gone back into the traditional field to find it wasn't so traditional after all. Or there were a bunch of interesting revolutionaries that have really changed cinema from inside.
Yes, definitely. And I think my own approach to filmmaking is different than theirs, and that's part of the feeling of having the filmmakers who always or sometimes edit. But I also, as I was reading about a new person, discovering somebody else looking at footage, from a film that they had edited, I thought, okay, so this person is doing Bonnie and Clyde, Dede Allen, or a Buñuel film, or you name it. But the basic work of it is the same. I may be editing disparate footage into something that somebody might call experimental. But getting a sense of rhythm, understanding how one image connects to the next, creating these, sort of unspoken relationships between things, it has to happen in a narrative Hollywood movie in the same way that it has to happen in an experimental film, in a documentary, in any film. When I was doing the pages, I first had just biographical information about each woman. And at some point, I thought a part of the issue of editing is that it's seamless, it's invisible. If it's good, people don't notice it.
Right.
And so they don't talk about the editor. They talk about the director, or they'll talk about the cinematographer, or they'll talk about the writer. And I thought the way to start correcting that, aside from the website in general, is to get the words of the editors. And so that was another element that I added to each page. So you can hear each woman say, well, when I was working with Godard, when I was working with Herzog, when I was working with, any of these others, this is the kind of stuff that happened.
Yeah.
These were the decisions I made. These were the changes I made, etc.
Fascinating. I mean, you're talking about some of the most famous filmmakers in the 20th century and beyond. And the story actually begins in the 19th century. Your website had so much on it. I've promised that you're going to take us on a journey. So where do you want to begin?
Well, when I started making the website, I definitely wanted it to be very quiet. So, okay, websites are filled with links. You start reading an article, link, 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 link. And I thought, this is a big, complicated topic. There are going to be lots of people in it. And I want people to experience it more like a book. And I want to have a sense of order to it. So I'm going to, for example, organize the editors by date of birth. So you start with Hetty Gray Baker, who began working in 1912, worked on some of the earliest John Ford movies, et cetera. And you end with Pamela Martin, who did The Battle of the Sexes, 2 or 3 years ago. And so you can sort of travel through time. And I also, just within each page, wanted it to be sufficient but not overwhelming, so that you could go to see Adrienne Fazan. You could see a picture of her, then you could read about the fact that she was the main editor for Minnelli for many years. She won an Oscar for Gigi. And then you might see another picture, then see a few posters. So that was the next element. I thought, oh, people like visuals, so I'm going to find fantastic movie posters for films that each of them did. And so on a page, you can just have a sort of a sampling of that person, and then you can move to the next, next. And then it grew so that I wanted to include some quotation from each of them. And then in the course of doing the research, I out how impossible it was to get information. Because when I started, I typed in women film editors, and Google came up with Thelma Schoonmaker, of course, the editor of Scorsese forever, and maybe Dede Allen was on the first page, and then there was nothing. So in the case of each person, it was a tremendous amount of research, but once I found, after digging and digging and digging, a really good interview, whether a video interview or a text interview, then I thought, now I'm going to make an appendix. So I have a like 50-page appendix in the back, so that with each woman, you can go to that and find really the best information. Aside from Blanche Sewell, who edited The Wizard of Oz, there's somebody like Gloria Schumann, and she edited 222 films, and pretty much all of the films from the golden age of Mexican cinema in the 1940s and 50s. Amazing. Yeah, so, and a lot of the women did, 85 films, however many films. Gloria Schumann wins the prize for 222 films. So she was one sort of remarkable example, after I had been already overwhelmed by so many other people. And then there's like André Daventure, and she's French, and she started a small company in Paris called Atria, or Atria, but she was the editor of all of the great films that were coming out of Africa in the 1960s and 70s. Any of the great African directors, multiple films by each of them. And so she had this studio in Paris, and they would come and work with her in Paris. And a lot of them, it was maybe their first film or their second film, and they spoke about how much they learned from her. They had shot very carefully and written very carefully, but then she was sort of crafting these films. So she was also a great find. When I started researching, a lot of the films were Hollywood studio films. And I recognized from my own interests and the world that that wasn't the end of the story. And so I started looking out into the world. There are also Indian editors, Tunisian editors, Egyptian editors, Iranian editors, Polish, you name it. So you have somebody like Halina Prugar-Kettling, who was the main editor of Andrzej Wajda, who, when I was coming up as a filmmaker, his movies were so important to me. And again, when I was out of Poland, and I was watching those films and not necessarily thinking about the editing, because they were perfectly edited. So I was just engaged in the story, which is the point of good editing. Right. And suddenly I discovered that it was a woman who was doing all those great films.
Do you think it would have changed your experience of yourself and your own work at that moment if you had known it?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, it probably would have made me feel good about
you had more company than you knew.
Women, and also because now, of course, we have much more of an awareness about, let's say, Hollywood and how terrible it's been with women. And so there are more websites and conferences and discussions about, women. There should be more women directors. There have been great women directors, more awareness cinematographers. And so I think if, 25 years ago, I had made this website, people would have said, wow, there have been lots of women editors. Yeah. So I think it would have been good for the general public or other filmmakers, and also for me to know about it, but it took until now.
Does the gendering of different roles and the appreciation that's accorded to those different roles, and hence the different genders, is that consistent across the different countries that you looked at? Like, do the Italians celebrate their women editors more? Is it just us who haven't celebrated them? India, the other countries you've mentioned?
I think editing has always been a very invisible profession. And when I finished, when I launched the site at first, last January, I was in touch with ACE, American Cinema Editors, because there are lots of women ACE editors who are on it. And they sent it out to their editors. And one of the emails I got back was from Carol Littleton, who edited E.T., as well as many great films by Lawrence Kasdan.